Hello and a warm welcome, everybody. Today we are delving deep into the pivotal role of vertical farming in addressing pressing environmental and climate challenges. I'm Nicholas from FTHIA In Action, and I'm honored to guide you through this enlightening conversation. In this exclusive interview, we'll be joined by Amber Monroe, who has not only excelled in the world of vertical farming, but has also played a crucial part in shaping its impact on the environmental side and climate, of course. As we explore the intersection of agriculture and environmental responsibility, our guests now will share insights into the transformative power of vertical farming, from land conservation to water efficiency, reduced emissions, and beyond. We're going to uncover how vertical farming emerges as a beacon of hope in the fight against climate change. So without further ado, let's dive in this exciting dialogue today. Your vertical farming journey begins right here, right now. Welcome abroad. So today we are here for our Erasmus Plus project, ECOWORK Plus, where we embark on a journey to empower young minds in the transformative field of vertical farming. In a world facing pressing environmental and climate challenges, the need for sustainable solutions has never been more critical, let's say. So vertical farming emerges as a powerful response to those challenges, offering innovative approaches that go beyond traditional agriculture that we are used to it. At its core, VFI redefines how we grow our food by optimizing space, conserving resources, and minimizing environmental impact. Today, we'll explore the importance of vertical farming in fostering a sustainable future, mitigating climate change, and addressing pressing environmental concerns. So, Amber, please, can you share a bit of your background and experience in the field of agriculture and sustainable practices?
Absolutely. So yeah, my name's Amber Monroe. I'm originally from the United States, but I've been living in Iceland now for about 5.5 years. My background in agriculture is that I'm from an agriculture state. The state of Georgia has all kinds of agriculture because of our climate. So we're growing cotton, peaches, all kinds of things. And then we also have a small fishing industry as well off the coast. So I've always been interested in it. I come from a family of gardeners and farmers and people that are interested in producing our own food. And, as I was growing up, I became more and more interested in things like vertical farming and aquaponics, which is also another way of taking aquaculture wastewater, fish wastewater, and it's so full of nutrients that you can use it to grow food. So kind of combining that with vertical farming is something that I'm doing now over in Iceland as well. So I see it as a really good opportunity to grow food indoors and year round. So I'm just excited about all kinds of agriculture. So I've worked with poultry as well, working with chickens, cattle, and then just vegetables, producing vegetables and fish.
That's really great. But what initially sparked your interest in vertical farming compared to the agriculture that we are used to it?
Yeah, I mean, I think climate concern is a big issue of mine. I mean, our world is changing. We're being impacted by population growth and also just different things going on in the environment. And I started hearing more and more about vertical farming as a good option for these kinds of locations, because you can do it indoors, you can do it year round, you can do it in a climate controlled environment. And, I saw that as a good opportunity for us to continue producing food locally as well. So it's kind of like a way of ensuring you have a good local, reliable food source. And so I'm looking at that as a good option, as we're going through all of these changes worldwide.
I understand. That's great. For our audience who may be less familiar for the topic and the aspect of vertical farming, could you provide a brief explanation of what vertical farming is and what are the key principles of vertical farming?
Yeah, so for those that might not be familiar with vertical farming, vertical means you're growing up. So you can picture a bookshelf, for example, or a shelf, and you're growing plants, vegetables, whatever it may be, on these shelves. So what happens is you may have, 1 cubic meter of space, and maybe, if you're using traditional agriculture, of course, everything is just on one level, just on the ground. But when you're taking that same area and you're putting in this vertical, these shelves, you're able to produce more within that same space. So the idea is that you're maximizing as much space as you can, which can really increase your crop yield. And there's some things that you have to think about because, of course, when you're having shelves, maybe you're blocking some light. So maybe you have to put in some extra LEDs or making sure that you're building in such a way that your plants are able to get that natural sunlight. So you have to think about things like that. But the idea is that you're able to grow more food within the same space because you're growing upwards as well, not just flat out.
But in terms of quality, for example, are there any big differences between vertical farming and horizontal traditional way?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably the big difference is that you have more control when you're in a vertical farming setup, simply because most of the time when you're growing vertically, you're typically in a greenhouse or more in a solid indoor building, so you have more environmental control over it. Of course, it's probably easier to just do more traditional farming out in the field because you don't necessarily need anything, special equipment or things like that. But then you also have to deal with any environmental changes or things that might go on outside. So it just depends on what's available to you. And also to, what is your end goal? Are you trying to produce more, in the long run? Then in that case, a vertical farming setup could be a really good goal.
That sounds awesome. And in terms of water scarcity, what do you do in vertical farming to reduce the overall water usage general?
Yeah, so this is also a big benefit of doing vertical farming because you do have more controls in place because, again, typically you're indoors, maybe not always. I have seen some vertical farms that are outside, but usually you maybe would use a setup known as hydroponics, which is you have a water and maybe you're adding liquid fertilizer or something like that. Or like in my case, I use aquaponics, so I'm using fish tank wastewater, but you're running this water directly to the plant roots. And what that means is that no water is being lost in a field. All of the nutrients are going directly to where they need to be. And what you can do is kind of do like a closed loop. So if that water or the nutrients don't get used the first time, you can keep it within that same system and continue to recycle it. So you just have more control over these kinds of systems when you're able to keep the water and the nutrients together instead of kind of putting it out into the environment where hopefully most of it gets to your plants and your crops, but not necessarily. And that also prevents any runoff as well into nearby, creeks, rivers, lakes, things like that. So it's just more of an environmental control as well.
So in terms of sustainability, it's let's say preferable compared to the normal agriculture because we save much more water. Let's say, for example.
Much more. And there's been numerous studies on this that show the amount of water that you can save compared to traditional agriculture. In a lot of cases, it can be over 80-90% more water is actually saved or actually applied directly to the crops, depending on how your system is set up. So from a sustainable viewpoint, definitely, as far as water and nutrients too, because we also have to think about, if we're growing our crops, the nutrients that they need. It's not just about giving them water. We have to make sure that they stay healthy enough to produce what we're trying to produce. So if you're able to control it better, then definitely it's a more sustainable system. Mm-hmm.
That's perfect. And let's dive into to the lower greenhouse gas emissions. Could you elaborate on how FTHIA helps to that aspect, especially in terms of the transportation and controlled environments?
Yeah, definitely. So if we think about, places where we live, whether we live in a city or a small town, we can think about maybe empty buildings or things that aren't being used. Those could actually be converted into indoor farms. So we actually have the chance to look within our communities and repurpose these buildings, repurpose these places into actual food production centers. So like in our case here in Iceland, we're an island kind of in the middle of nowhere. And, we do have some greenhouses as well, but we still import quite a lot. And we're trying to change that a bit. And, when we're looking at the transportation costs and also the freshness sometimes of the things that come to us, they're not as fresh as they could be if they were produced right here in our own community. So there's definitely some good opportunities for us to kind of look around and see how can we produce something locally, which is great for sustainability, and being more environmentally aware, but could also create job opportunities, training opportunities, having something that's local and fresh, right next door. Mm-hmm.
But in general, in terms of setting up a vertical farming business, or do you prefer a specific region or place, or a vertical farming can be, you can build vertical farming everywhere?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely easier to have. I mean, if you're in a more stable environment, of course, that's always going to make things easier for you, whether it's traditional farming, and I'm all for traditional farming. I think it's also great. We just have to be aware of how we're doing things. But from a vertical farming standpoint, like for example, the one that I have is fully indoors. I mean, it's in an old barn. And so, we don't have to have natural sunlight. I use LEDs. But if you are in a place that has lots of natural sunlight and you could set up your vertical farm in a way where you can use it, then that's perfect. So I would say that there's definitely benefits to being in warmer places or maybe sunnier places, but you can still do it anywhere as long as there's the opportunity for you to have some kind of a stable environment, whether it's a building or a greenhouse, something like that. So the option is there regardless of where you are.
Understand, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And since you mentioned lead and regarding lightning and climate control, how does the technology used in vertical farming in general, not only in lead lighting, but in general, contribute to energy efficiency, to reduce this energy, to keep to save energy compared to the traditional agriculture?
Yeah, I mean, so LEDs, there's pros and cons, and there are things that you have to think about. So of course, buying this equipment can be expensive. It just depends, again, on what your goal is. But like in my case, I can't really use the natural sunlight at this time, so I need to use the LEDs. But they have a really long life. So I mean, they should last for quite a long time. I mean, I still have some of the lights that I've been using for almost 3 years now with no problems. They're very energy efficient. They don't draw hardly any power, which is great. And then also they work quite well for the crops that I'm growing, which is mostly microgreens at this time, as well as some flowers. So you also have to look at what are the things that you're going to grow? What are you interested in? Because one light does not fit all. You have to figure out what's going to work for you and your crops. But LEDs, I mean, they're very effective in growing vegetables. You just have to determine what spectrum you need for your plants, and that's a whole other conversation for lights and things. But of course, with traditional farming, the hope is that you're using more sunlight so that there is that natural side, but that natural sunlight could also be used for vertical farming as well. So you just kind of have to look at the needs of what you need for your farm, and also what you're planning to grow. But it's been proven that with LEDs that they're some of the most efficient lights that you can use for growing. So I definitely recommend those if that's something that you're going to do. They last a long time and they're great for the plants.
That's surely awesome. And since you mentioned again the costs, regarding the cost regarding cost efficiency, not only when it's the initial part of the business, but lifelong, regarding your lifelong experience in the vertical farming. What's the cost efficiency compared to the traditional agriculture, if there is?
Ooh, that's really difficult to say, because I think you would have to compare what is it you're growing, for example. So, of course, with traditional farming, there's other upkeep that you have to think about. If you're using tractors, if you're using, if you're hiring people to go out into the fields, to harvest things, your fertilizers, the cost of all of that. So you have to kind of weigh that out. With vertical farming, at least in my case, everything is kind of, condensed into one space. So I'm not having to buy a big piece of land. I'm not having to rent a big piece of land. You can also automate quite a lot these days. So you have the chance to actually build your own. I won't say it's super easy. It takes a little bit of time to learn, but you can build your own microcontrollers that will help you regulate your temperature and help you check out your pH, what's going on with your crops, these kinds of things. So there actually is a lot that you can do yourself that will also save money. But I think the short answer is that it just depends on what you're trying to grow. Some crops are better off using traditional farming because maybe they need more space, but the vast majority of crops can be grown indoors using the vertical farming setup. But I wouldn't, for example, grow corn in a vertical farming setup just because you need more space. So it all just comes down to what you're planning to grow, and then you have to weigh out the cost there.
This is really important because here in Greece, let's say, and in our region, in central Greece, majority of young people, they think that traditional agriculture is it's really expensive. You need a lot of thousands of euros to begin. So they are kind of getting really early disappointed. They like the connection with the environment, the nature, production, but they are getting really early disappointed. And that's why we are trying to make a focus on vertical farming as an alternative, because as you already saying, there are a lot of aspects that vertical farming is more productive, more efficient. So probably, all the young people that they are watching and they are interested in starting, it's really important for them to realize that it's not something that you cannot approach at all, but it's easy.
Exactly. And you should definitely, I want to encourage anybody that's interested in this. Sometimes you just have to start. You don't have to start big. You don't have to, like, for example, and maybe this is helpful for someone that might be listening. I'm mostly focused on microgreens at the moment. And the reason that I'm doing that is because they do have value. I can harvest them within a week and a half, 2 weeks. And you don't even have to have any special lighting, anything. You don't have to have a lot of space to grow it. So for someone that might be interested in kind of going into farming, it's okay for them to maybe start off with something that will help generate that money or generate the revenue. They don't always have to stick with it forever, but that's kind of what you do to just kind of get in there, get some practice with it and see what works for you. So yeah, definitely. I don't think people should be scared to try something.
That's the most important thing, just to start. So regarding the reduced chemical usage in vertical farming, in your experience, how does the controlled environment of vertical farming impact the need for chemical pesticides or herbicides?
Yes. So my setup is a little bit different maybe from most other vertical farms. There's really kind of two kinds of vertical farms. You have a hydroponic vertical farm, which is where you're adding in liquid fertilizers and then it's being mixed with water and goes directly to the plants. I do a little bit of that, but I mostly try to use fish wastewater. So I'm feeding the fish, they're producing this waste, and then there's good bacteria that convert that waste into a form that plants can use to grow. So in my case, I have animals, I have fish. So therefore, I can't add pesticides. I can't add herbicides. I'm not certified organic just because it's quite difficult to do. But a lot of my practices are organic because I can't just add things into the system. So if I see that there's an issue, then I have to take care of that myself in a way that's safe for the plants and safe for the fish. So, when you are in a more controlled environment, whether it's hydroponics or aquaponics with the fish, the hope is that, of course, you have more control over everything, hopefully over disease, hopefully over pests that might come in, because when you have plants out in a field or more in traditional agriculture, you are more exposed, so hopefully you have an easy time of it, but things do happen. I will say that you still have to be careful, and this is just friendly advice for anybody that does vertical farming. I made the mistake once of bringing in a plant cutting, and I thought it was bug-free, and it was not bug-free. It had aphids, and within about 2 months, it was wiping out about 40% of my crops. And and I hadn't had an issue before that because I had a controlled environment. So you still need to be aware of what you're bringing into your farm, even if it's an indoor, because then I just had to take everything out and just reset. And then it was fine. They didn't come back because I had gotten rid of, all the aphids and everything. And that just goes to show you do have control over the environment unless you accidentally bring something in, not thinking about it. So I definitely would say you don't need to use the pesticides or the herbicides, anything like that in these systems. Just more control. So just be aware of what you're bringing in and out of the farm. Very important.
So there's always the risk, always.
Yeah, yeah.
That's why we need to keep a control.
Exactly.
So Amber, regarding food security, when we are talking about traditional agriculture, we are talking about huge production, and how does vertical farming contribute to food security, especially in urban areas? Do you have any specific example or some case studies you can share from Iceland, EU, or the States?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can think of, well, especially from Georgia, from my home state. The area that I'm from was kind of semi-rural. We had some farmland, but people were kind of together. But then we had bigger cities like Atlanta, Georgia. And I just remember, hearing of some farms that were there. They were indoor urban farms in the heart of Atlanta, which is this, millions of people are living there. And of course, there's no farmland, right? It's a city, it's a major city. So what's great about it is that it shows that you can take, again, these empty buildings in communities or whatnot, or for example, even rooftops of buildings that are not being exposed or not being used. You could turn them into green spaces that are being used for food production. So there's definitely, a lot of good opportunities where we could do things like this locally in our communities for food security, because things can happen and maybe we didn't get this shipment of vegetables or whatever, but it's okay because we have this local farm here that can produce it. You know what I mean? So it's creating these opportunities where it's preventing disruptions to the food chain. It's kind of dealing with those. And even growing up, where I was, we were experiencing hurricanes quite a lot. And there were weeks where maybe we wouldn't get shipments, from other places because of damage from storms. But luckily, we would have a local farm nearby that could actually supply the grocery stores, the local shopping centers. So for me, I think just having more vertical farming opportunities within our communities, it does increase the food reliability, and also too for communities that maybe struggle with environmental challenges, job opportunities, things like that. If they're able to produce their own food within the community, I think it's a great step. And like we talked about the water scarcity earlier, that's a really big component as well. If they don't have a lot of access to fresh water, it's okay because you can still do a system with this, a vertical farming system. And there's even been studies showing that you can do it with salt water or with water that has some salinity. You can still grow crops with it. So lots of opportunities.
Really, really interesting to hear it. And I would like to ask you at that point, at the vertical farming businesses world, I know that in traditional agriculture, there are a lot of associations or unions between them, and they are supportive to each other to grow their products and improve the quality. Do you have also associations or unions just for vertical farming within Europe or I don't know?
Yeah, I mean they do exist, and I'll be honest, I'm more involved probably in the aquaponics associations, I would say, because that's the main. I mean, I'm using vertical farming, but a lot of my time is spent with the aquaponics. So, but definitely there are groups that discuss news in vertical farming, discuss, hey, how can we do this better? Here's some troubles that I had. So there is a lot of information flow that's going on. And I do know that there's also been some conferences and meetings as well that I'm hoping to get into, in the next year or two, because it would be really nice to see, some other vertical farms. And generally in agriculture, at least in the vertical farming and the aquaponics communities, we want to see more people doing it. It's not meant to be you don't want to keep all the information for yourself. We're trying to improve food security. We're trying to make it more accessible. We want younger people to be involved. So, if there's a vertical farm or some kind of farm that you're interested in visiting, I would definitely say to reach out to them. And the same for these organizations. We want to see the younger people get involved, for sure.
That's really lovely, because it's always great to share your experience, to share your feedback, to share new ideas, to meet new people, because you have already started, but someone is starting now. So you were at the same point few days, for example, or a few months or a few years ago. So it's always nice to share. Now let's talk a bit about climate change and vertical farming. How does vertical farming contribute to mitigating the impacts of climate change, particularly in terms of reducing carbon emissions?
Yeah, I mean, just kind of going back to what we were saying, having a localized food production, I mean, that's a big deal. Having something that is fresh, maybe doesn't need as much packaging. I mean, that's also a big issue when you go to the store. In many places, everything is in plastic. Everything is, so we have to think about all aspects of our carbon emissions, our carbon footprint, environmental footprint in general. If we have a local farm where, say, someone, or I say a local farm, an indoor vertical farm, or some kind of shop that sells the products for the vertical farm, if you're able to go there yourself with your own bags, with your own packaging, and you're able to pick it up, and that's something that we actually do here with the restaurants. I use reusable containers. When they're done, I take them back. And so you're trying to kind of do a little more of this localized relationship where we're trying to be aware of what we're doing. And then, yes, of course, if we're not having to import as much the product or transport, I shouldn't even say import, transport, even just across the country. If you have something that's local, less of a carbon footprint. That's the hope. So there's a lot that we can do there, and you can be creative with it as much as you want, but just trying to be aware of the environmental impact. Definitely.
And also, what's the role of vertical farming in adapting to the climate? What's changed every day almost today, considering factors like extreme weather events and shifting growing conditions. What can vertical farming do in that case?
Yeah, I mean, so my farm is in northern Iceland, which is known for being very cold and very dark in the winter. So luckily we've had a relatively calm winter, but one of the good things about having an indoor vertical farm is that you can produce year-round. regardless of what is happening outside. So, if you have a good solid building that's nice and insulated, hey, no problem. You can continue to produce year round regardless of, is it snowing? Is it really hot outside? Is it this and that? So you just have more environmental control over what is going on. And of course, our weather patterns will likely continue to shift. So if we're kind of making these investments into these good, reliable vertical farms and have a setup that maybe doesn't rely on as much electricity, or maybe doesn't rely on things that are going on outside, you'll be able to have a farm that's producing all year round. So, and that's what we've been able to do here, regardless of, we've had some very nasty stormy days in the past, but it was fine. The power stayed on, everything was good, and we continued to grow and, go to the stores and restaurants. So there's definitely some benefits there to having an indoor vertical farm.
That sounds really interesting and different to my experience, because in my village, my grandpa and majority of people, half of the days of the year they cannot work.
Yeah.
So it's really different. And please, Amber, could you elaborate on the environmental sustainability aspects of vertical farming and its potential to combat climate change on a global scale? And if so, if vertical farming grew, it's going to grow a lot during the next couple of years. Are there any possibilities that could prevent some natural phenomena, or could improve a lot the environmental sustainability?
Yeah, let me think about how I want to answer that. I would say, of course, this is not a solution to climate change. Unfortunately, we're living in a world now where we have to adapt around it, right? It's happening, it's happening. So when I'm thinking about the environmental sustainability and dealing with climate change, I'm also maybe going to add in our population growth as well, because that also has a hand in climate change, and it is also something that we're having to think about. So if we are able to, one of the big issues that we foresee in the future, and we talk about this in the aquaculture industry quite a lot, is meeting the protein demand of a growing population. And how can we meet that protein demand when we're dealing with climate change, because there's all these issues that are going on. So there could be a possibility that by using this vertical farming and getting it more widespread and making it more accessible for people, that we are able to maybe increase plant-based proteins, for example, to make sure that we're meeting the nutrient needs of our people everywhere. And then by using, like, for example, aquaponics, you're doing more land-based fish production as well. So there's a couple different directions that we could go with it, for sure. But on a global scale, we need to be more mindful of our emissions. And so again, if we're doing more local productions, it doesn't have to be a big farm. My farm's not big, but if you're able to do something kind of local for the local communities nearby, that makes a big difference, especially when we have lots of these little farms scattered all around the world. So I think that we need to really be encouraging people to do this, even if it's at a small scale, because over time, the environmental impacts, they can improve by having this localized food production instead of shipping something from one side of the world to the other. Definitely. But we have to also consider the food demands of our population, because that goes hand in hand with climate change.
Of course, because food section is like enormous compared to this. So regarding climate smart agriculture, because this is a sector that is gaining a lot of importance and reputation last years. How does vertical farming align with this concept, and what strategies can young entrepreneurs adopt to make their vertical farming ventures climate smart?
Yes. So for those of you guys that have a bit of a creative or techie side, this is the fun part. This is really fun. And this is something that I'm learning a lot myself, is that you can be as complicated or less complicated as you want when it comes to climate smart technologies. So for example, you can actually use sensors that will control what's going on. So for example, if I'm growing lettuce and the ideal pH is within a certain range for this kind of lettuce, and I have a little sensor in my water, and it'll send an alert to my phone. It'll say, hey, the pH has gone too high, or it's gone too low. You know, do you want me to do something? So you can actually use logic control on your systems to control what's happening. And sometimes you can do it automatically. So you really don't have to do anything. And, you know, a lot of people will say, well, it's not that important to do that. You know, you don't have to do that. And they're right. You don't necessarily have to. But if you think about it like this, is that if you have these kinds of technologies, it can help prevent crop loss. It can actually save you money in the long run. It can save you a lot of work, because agriculture, even indoor agriculture, it takes effort. It takes work to do. So if you're having these kind of controls over what's happening in your systems, and even if it just sends you a message that something's wrong, that's a big deal. That's a really big deal. And especially if you're growing other things in addition, like fish, for example, it is important that you know that. And I kind of made a little joke earlier about making microcontrollers, but I mean, you can learn these things on YouTube. You can actually get just a small microcontroller like Arduino, and you can learn how to make your own little sensor for, I mean, it's very cheap to actually do this. And, you know, you can teach yourself how to do this, or of course, go to classes and things, but there's all kinds of stuff that you can do. And for me, I started off simple. I started off using cameras, for example, just Wi-Fi cameras. That alone, just letting me visually check my systems when I'm not there, makes a big difference. So you can, again, keep it as simple as you want, but if you can also go very technical with climate smart technologies, just environmental controls, humidity, temperature, all of these things. And that can help you get the ideal crop, you know, most healthy, most valuable, but also just prevents food waste too, if you have more control.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Coming a bit to the end of our discussion, I would like to ask you, what are the challenges, the major challenges or limitations that do you see in the widespread adoption of vertical farming, and in which way can these be addressed?
Yeah, I mean, there is a cost. I mean, just starting up anything like this, there is, of course, a cost. And, you know, if, for example, you don't already have a building or a greenhouse or something, those are things that you have to think about. Do you need the LED lights? Do you need shelves? You know, so I would definitely say, if you're interested in doing something like this, see what resources you can get, see what you can do yourself. You know, if there's a limited budget. And I would also say, you know, unless you had some kind of a business loan or something, I would say don't go high end too fast. I've seen people do that where they say, oh, I have to have the greatest equipment and the most expensive equipment. And sure, it looks cool, but it's a lot of money, you know, and in the end, you have to make sure you're selling enough to offset that cost. So I think a lot of it is the challenge of, you have to look at your market. What are people actually interested in? And I recommend talking to people about that. I mean, it's not always just a wise thing to just choose something to grow. I mean, of course, you can try a few things, but you need to make sure people are going to buy it. But then also any cost of your equipment, rents, whatever that may be. And if it means that you have to start off kind of small in the beginning, start off small. That's fine. You know, as long as you're starting, it's okay. But try not to go too big, too fast. You don't want to sink too much money into it at the beginning without checking out your market first. You want to make sure that there is a market to sell to.
So as far as I understand it, it's really important, take your time, gain your own experience, explore different alternatives, and then focus on the product, on the path that you want to take into this business.
Exactly. And if there are, you know, people within your community that you really trust, you know, like what I did is there were a couple of friends of mine who ran restaurants or worked as a chef in a restaurant. And I went to them actually with the catalog. And I said, hi, I'm interested in maybe growing these kinds of plants, these kinds of seeds. Is this something that you would be interested in, or is this not the taste you're looking for? And that was actually really helpful to do things like that. So, if you feel like you kind of have that connection with people in the community, and if you don't, I recommend doing that. It's very important, to get to know people within the community, because they'll be your customers. And if you find someone that's willing to give feedback, that's going to save you a lot of time in the setup of your vertical farm. Very important. Very important.
So we have talked a lot about the past and the present, let's say, of vertical farming, but how is about the future? How do you see the future of vertical farming and regarding also technology? Because we are talking a lot about AI, and that AI is gonna conquer the whole world, or even has already started to do that. But how are the things in vertical farming for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, of course, our world is changing. Things are getting more technical, and for better or worse, that is just how it is. This is just, so we just have to learn about it. And I recommend, like with AI, trying to learn about it. It can be a good tool. It can be, especially when it comes to agriculture, it can be. I'm cautious a little bit with it, but a lot of that comes down to environmental controls. So you can use this technology as a tool to improve how we're growing things. And I'm seeing more and more, these portable vertical farming setups, ones that are set up in like the shipping containers. I'm seeing more and more of those, so people are able to set them up, at home, or companies are doing it as well. And most of these are equipped with some kind of, AI technology or some kind of automation control, because growing things just in a container, you have to have environmental controls. So I think over the next few years, we'll start seeing more and more facilities, like larger facilities, that will be growing, but then also a rise in portable setups as well. Mm-hmm. So, so I think a lot of people will continue to do this, and they're growing all kinds of things. Mostly lettuce I've seen, but of course you can grow other products as well.
But do you think that in the next couple of years and in future in general, more and more young people, they are going to go into vertical farming?
I think so. I mean, at least, since I've been doing Ísponica for the last few years, I mean, I've had quite a few students just reach out just to come and do internships or just come and see the setups of it, because they're very, very interested in learning more about vertical farming or just sustainable agriculture in general. What can we do better? So I think more younger people are paying attention to where their food comes, how, where it's coming from, how it's being grown, and how they can have an active role in it. So I do feel that there's going to be more and more younger people involved in this. And I think that's really important. It's the next generation of farmers. And it'll look different than it has in the past, with traditional farming. So yes, I think there's going to be a rise, definitely, in younger people being involved.
That's really interesting to listening. And so far we have talked about great things. And you, Amber, any final thoughts or advice for individuals or communities or young people that they are interested in exploring or adopting vertical farming practices? What do you say regarding your experience about it?
Yeah, I mean, I will say I've learned a lot. and I will also say, if you have the chance to speak to someone directly about vertical farming, someone that's done it, do it, because we can tell you all the things not to do just to save you some time, and just to kind of give advice. But I think that, there are so many good things that come with vertical farming. Largely, you just have more control over what you're growing, and it's so nice to be able to go in, into a controlled environment, like here, for example. There might be a blizzard outside and it's freezing and I can't imagine doing anything outside, but then I go inside to this warm building and there's, grow lights and plants and everything growing. I would say it's definitely worth checking into if it's something that you might be interested in. And if you're not sure, if you're ready to take that leap, like I said, start small. You could set it up at home. Just have a shelf with things growing on it. See how you feel about it. Is it easy for you to control? What could you do differently? But I definitely encourage you to do that. I think it's very nice to grow something yourself and to understand everything that went into it. Because sometimes we don't know what's happening with our food when it's coming from somewhere else, or if it was treated with anything. It should be labeled, but not always. So I think there's just a stronger connection when you're growing your own food, definitely. And same for the communities as well. They're very happy to have local food.
That's awesome. That's completely awesome to my side. So Amber, so far we have mentioned and talked and analyzed a lot of really important and interesting aspects of vertical farming compared to environment and climate change. Mm-hmm. And I would like to thank you so much for having this conversation and being able to share it with a lot of young people who are now making their first steps to this business. So as we wrap up our discussion on vertical farming's vital role in environmental and climate sustainability, I would like to express sincere gratitude to Amber Monroe and Ísponica from Northern Iceland, from Southern Crocker. I'm saying right?
Yeah, that was good. That was good.
Because all of us, I think we know that it's really difficult to write it and to spell it.
Yes, just a little bit,
And for sharing with us all these invaluable insights. Your experiences, Amber, and wisdom contribute significantly to inspire a new generation, new young people in the pursuit of sustainable agriculture. So thank you so much for being a guide on this journey today towards a greener, more resilient future through vertical farming sector. Thank you so much, Amber.
Anytime. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.